Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the OTTRED Spotlight podcast. Throughout the course of my day as a recruiter exclusively in the OTT and media space, I'm lucky enough to come across some of the brightest, commercially sharp and inspiring minds that I believe exist in any industry. Lots of those disciplines constitute areas of the business that cover commercial, leadership, technical depth. But when you bring all of those things together, actually, it all comes down to delivery and operations. The heartbeat of every single organization, agnostic of sector, comes down to its competence to deliver and make sure that customers and clients get what they want. The guest that I'm going to be speaking to today is the Director of Delivery and Operations for a well-known brand globally in the OTT space. I'm going to be speaking to Jonathan Gross about his career journey, what he's learned, some personal anecdotes that have helped shape his leadership style, and where he thinks the importance of delivery and operations sit within a successful and growing organization. Jonathan, welcome to your episode of the OTTRED Spotlight podcast.
Thanks, Chris. What an introduction.
Well, we'll get into some of those things and probably much more, knowing the way that conversations between you and I often go, Jonathan. But look, it's a pleasure to have you on the Spotlight podcast. You and I have known each other for a couple of years at least. And the story of BritBox and seeing what's happened with BritBox has been interesting from a public domain perspective. But you and your role at BritBox and what your team do in the way that I've just described it, the heartbeat of the operation and making sure that various different parts of the business get what they need and that there is delivery traction is what you personify within that business. So I'm really looking forward to talking about how you've got to the level that you've got to. The objective of this podcast is always to tell the life stories and career stories of the thought leaders and business leaders in the OTT space, and also learning what the accent is on the way that you run your team, the way you create culture. And I know the footprint of your team is international as well, so it'll be interesting to hear about the dynamic that creates. Before I potentially stroke your ego anymore, Jonathan, it's probably a good opportunity to allow you to introduce yourself to people who might not be as familiar with BritBox as you and I are, or who might not have met you before. Give us a quick introduction, Jonathan. Who are you? What do you do? What are your accountabilities within the business?
Okay, cool. Thanks, Chris, for that introduction. I really enjoyed that. I'm Jonathan Gross. I joined BritBox International in the summer of 2021. BritBox has been a fantastic place to work. For those of you who are not less familiar with BritBox International, it was set up as a joint venture between the BBC and ITV. Just a couple of weeks ago, actually, ITV sold their stake within the business, and now the business is wholly owned by the BBC Studios. And I'm personally really proud to have been on the journey whereby we built such a large business, and we operate in the as a speciality SVOD streamer, but having the number of subscribers we have coming up to sort of 3.8 million subscribers is really fantastic. And so I lead the global project management function at BritBox International, and essentially have accountability for all key projects within the business. Some of those projects will be very clear in terms of the outcomes. Might be sort of doing a price increase or launching a new distribution deal with a new partner. Other projects may be around thinking what we can do in terms of taking the proposition forward and driving forward our brand as well. So they have sort of a variety of different projects. And BritBox International, we're live in 8 markets. Our biggest market is the United States. We also have pretty big businesses in Australia and in Canada, and we also are live in the Nordics and South Africa. It's
a fascinating business, actually. If you look at what the nucleus is in terms of the offering, the kind of classic British content, and then when you mention the markets that you're talking about, there's obviously big British populations there as well. But I'd imagine, at least initially, and maybe not so much anymore, I'm not sure if it's still the strategic theme that you pursue, it makes sense to do so, but you may have broadened the horizon on that a bit. actually capitalizing on people that are expats that want to see content that is high quality content that they're familiar with, that might be quite difficult to access in some of their regions. At least in 2017, I think, when BritBox started, was probably a lot tougher than it is now.
Yeah, I mean, BritBox, we've got a very loyal customer base. I think that, you know, a lot of the shows are shows that, you know, the kind of shows we may have seen sort of on BBC One and ITV, those kind of key drama type shows, and they have a real loyal following. And I think we're really proud of taking that kind of best of British content to our key markets.
Let me ask you this, Jonathan. I mean, we'll talk about what's made you who you are professionally more in the course of this interview, but with the role that you've got now and the importance of delivery in any business, but you own that accountability at the top table in BritBox International, what does that mean to you? You know, how would you describe your accountability?
I mean, first and foremost, what does it mean to me? I take it very seriously, and I'm really proud of the types of projects that myself and the team work on. And we really act as like the glue that brings all of the different business functions together. And I think doing so really enables more seamless delivery of projects. With, you know, projects that take place without individuals from my team, they can be very successful, but I think having that sort of one person who's managing the plan, managing the risks, managing the budget, and is really driving that the overarching cross-functional team towards that outcome, I think is really a useful provides, you know, significant benefit to the wider organization.
Yeah, it's essential. Absolutely. Is there an analogy you would use, Jonathan, to describe what you do? And, you know, just to kind of shoulder to shoulder with you on this one. When I'm describing Red Hole, our recruitment business, either internally or externally, I quite often use the analogy, and you'll definitely have heard this from me before, Jonathan, of being the Michelin star kitchen of recruitment. You know, taking pride in all of our ingredients, our service, the way we serve a dish, which is our digital shortlist. You know, if a guest calls us to the table and asks us to talk about something that's on their plate, we should do so eloquently and with pride. That's the way that I try and help the guys that work within the business see the way that I see my own business. Is there anything like that that you either think personally or that you share with your team about the way that you want your team to perceive their purpose within the business or even their own careers?
Yeah, no, I think that there are a few things that come to mind. Actually, we were at our, you know, last year we were at our management team away day, and I remember the management team had to create a Pecha Kucha. So I don't know if you're familiar with Pecha Kucha, but a Pecha Kucha is a Japanese technique of communicating, and then they have basically through pictures. What we had to do have a slide deck, and each slide had to show a picture, and you saw that slide for 20 seconds, and it just sort of told the story of your team. So yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I remember the way I started off that presentation. We showed some Pritt stick, and I was like, we are the glue that sort of, you know, brings this business together and sort of drives things forward. But then we sort of made a bit of a corny joke. Actually, this year I want to be the super glue, and sort of you know, to be even better. And that's actually something I'm really proud of and feel very passionate about. I think that even if you're doing a great job, you can even always do things better. It's about being reflective and always learning and challenging yourself to be even better. And that's really a theme that I try and instill in my team as well. And I think also sort of being more than the sum of our parts as well as a team, I think is really, really valuable. It's amazing when you get really sort of diverse people with really bright minds in a room. I think that sort of power to come together to create something even better is something that I'm really passionate about. And I'm always that person in the room. If we're sort of running a team meeting, if someone's being a little bit quiet, I'll say, you know, Joe Blogs, like, what's your view on this? Or how can we sort of make this even better? That kind of sentiment about sort of, you know, was a picture I showed in that Pecha Kucha of someone, of a high jumper jumping over the bar. And we sort of always want to raise that bar and try and do things even better. That mentality is something that I'm really passionate about. And I'd like to think as well within the team that creates an environment whereby people feel like they're growing and that they're learning and that we're never sitting still. And I'm really passionate about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Where does that come from, Jonathan? I know what your career background is. You've worked at some pretty amazing organizations, definitely ones that people will have heard of, and you're bound to have, become what you are today through the experiences that you've been exposed to, good and bad, in those chapters of your life. Give us a quick overview of, how you've got to the position that you've got to in BritBox International now, but the pit stops that you've made along the way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, fundamentally, before like going through the career history, I enjoy making things better and having conversations with people to do that and hearing people's points of view. That's just like innate and like built in me. And I think that that creates a really good vibe and energy within the organization. I'm sort of regularly listening to podcasts about how we can do things sort of even better, and sort of sending links out to the team as well. So this is sort of an interesting way of thinking about how can we do meetings, for example, better. We spend so much time in meetings. How can we make things even more effective? So yeah, I'm very passionate about that. In terms of my career history, happy to do a sort of a brief sort of potted history. So I started my career at KPMG in their management consulting. I was there for about 6-7 years. KPMG was fantastic, gave me sort of a lot of breadth. It very much was not focused in the OTT field. I was working in financial services. I was working in oil and gas, did some internal projects within KPMG, did some work within telcos as well. And the nice thing about working in management consulting, particularly sort of the early start of your career, it really gave me the breadth of the type of organizations. It gave me an insight into the culture of various organizations. I knew that, maybe working in this particular sector didn't really feel right for me. So, and getting a variety of different experiences across the consulting skill set. And KPMG also recruits like really bloody good people. So just like having the opportunity to learn from people and be trained up by those people, I think is a real privilege. But I mean, after sort of 6-7 years there, I was ready for a new challenge, and I saw a role came up at Sky, and I knew someone who was working there, and I joined Sky's OTT business in the UK, Now TV, and I joined Now TV very much in the early days. I mean, the service was going down regularly. It was a bit of a roller coaster, but obviously that service has gone on to sort of fantastic things since then, because I joined back in, I think,
2013.
2013, 2014. So it was very much the early days. Sky just investing in their sort of OTT business, and had the opportunity to work on sort of projects that we really take for granted now from an OTT perspective. Like if you're watching any OTT platform, you'll be very familiar with like queue up next episode or continue watching functionality. That didn't exist when that service actually launched. And I was working with the product and the insight teams to really launch some of those core.
How did those days feel, Jonathan? I mean, that was, I always think when I speak to people, well, kind of every day, but particularly on the podcast, kind of in the leadership space, that period from kind of 2010 to 2015 was when what we take for granted now in almost every home in the, around the world in different formats. And even increasingly, if you look at what Showmax are doing in sub-Saharan Africa, OTT is everywhere now. It's a digital frontier that touches so many people around the planet. But those years were the frontier years. You were there.
Yeah, and it was brilliant. I think that it was, like process wasn't really a thing. It was basically just like, let's just get this stuff done. We weren't sort of like an overly governance. It wasn't particularly like, it wasn't hierarchical. It was just like, we want to get this stuff done and get platforms out there. Because Sky also wanted to make sure that this business actually sort of had legs really as well. So yeah, it felt fresh. It felt dynamic. It felt, at times it felt a little bit, I guess, like scary, even sort of, like, oh my gosh, we're sort of, well, can our platform actually, it was the final day of the Premier League season, can our platform actually hold all the customers that are going to be signing up? And I remember getting sort of, I wasn't actually responsible for the tech platform, but at times over the weekends, getting people on a call, being like, I've got this issue, having to deal with stuff. And as I said, the Now TV platform has obviously come along leaps and bounds since those days, but it was a really good experience. And I think going through experiences like that, and also like experiences at KPMG, which was like high pressure, I don't really feel these days like, since really those days, like the pressure is kind of, you just take things a little bit more in your stride. And I think also, and in one's career, as you sort of go through your career, you sort of learn techniques and approaches to sort of manage yourself, to be the best you can be as well.
Absolutely. So that led you into the Sky chapter of your career. And I know that there were some pretty big numbers associated to things as OTT became more established. You were in program management, then, becoming more senior. I think there was a particular big deal with BT that you were integral to. That's probably, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but was that where you really started to get exposed to mega budgets when it came to millions being under your responsibility?
Yeah, that was that was an absolutely humongous project. It was the biggest project at the time in like that Now TV had ever done in terms of the capex again and the subscriber impact, and it really cut across every single part of our business, and it was a heavily matrix environment, and it was really bloody complex, because Sky and BT as well, we're bringing together two former competitors, cross-selling each other's content, building that relationship with our partner BT, and it was the amount of money that sort of BT was spending. I think in that first year they spent multi-millions of pounds promoting Now TV in the market, and I was leading the delivery of that project and sort of getting that launched. And it was really fast paced. There was a significant amount of pressure. There was a humongous team working there, and there was not just sort of project managers or business analysts, really cutting across the whole business. I remember chatting to my counterpart at BT, and we said, how many people do you think actually are working on this project? And we said, and we sort of together we thought actually north of 1,000 people, including the developers of offshore and stuff. And I think having the accountability for leading that project was like a fantastic experience. I'm really grateful for having the opportunity to have led that program. So I guess if you're listening to this, big shout out to Dan Payne, who gave me that opportunity for doing that. Because I think for me, that really sort of helped drive my career forward. And it was tough. There was hard stakeholder conversations. There were individuals within the team who had different desires and wants and wanted to work different way and trying to bring that together. And I went on my own personal journey as well on that project, and I think came out of it a lot stronger as well. And
I was going to say to you, actually, if there was one thing that you learned from the pressure, the accountabilities, being in a team of that size across two mega organizations, how would you describe that one thing, the tip of the spear in terms of, at the end of that, what you walked away with?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. I think the first thing is be kind to yourself. It is hard. I was also doing running that when I had very young kid as well, who probably wasn't sleeping as well. Thankfully, she sleeps a lot better these days. And I think I put a lot of pressure on myself as well. And I think really focusing on my own personal well-being was absolutely key. And there were times in that project where I maybe didn't do as much as I could have. But I think to be a good leader, it's you've got to put on your life jacket first. Because then how can you really help others as well? So that's for me, in my since I've always been very focused on sort of keeping fit as well. But I have my best days, and when I'm out running first thing in the morning with the dog, or I'm swimming, and I think sort of those just managing yourself effectively, I think is really key. And the other sort of key learning from that, I think, when you're under pressure as well as a leader, it's really tempting to tell people how to do something. You've got a vision of how to do something. You should be can you just draw it up, bottle, do it like that. But actually, it is hard, yeah, but you've got to like try not to like tell people how to do things. It's more about telling them what we want to achieve and really letting them surprise you with those results as well. So that's also sort of a key learning. And I think the only other learning I would call out from then is like really ensuring you have the right people on the bus. You're working on fast-paced projects of big commercial dependency. You need the right people on the bus to deliver the outcomes that you need.
What else do you need, Jonathan? You deal with what you've just described now on a daily basis. You've just given us that anecdote as a moment in your career, but now you're running everything for an organization that is now entirely owned by one of the most well-known brands in the world, the BBC. But the look on your face now is one of composure. You can tell that you've got the battle scars associated to that. Beyond just having good people, what is it about the culture that you need to cultivate for those people in order to create a great delivery team?
I think you've got to support people, but you've got to let them fly as well. I've recruited at BritBox International some really strong people, and shout out to you, Chris, who've been involved in that journey as well. And I think people want to fly as well, and I think as a manager, it's about sort of opening doors for those people in your team, not being like too funny about, oh, you can't present to this person for whatever reason. Like, you got to just trust yourself as a leader, and your own capabilities, and give people in your team the opportunity to sort of get that face time with other people, keep senior people in the business, let them run those big projects and let them fly really, and let them grow.
There's within the complexion of any team, you've clearly got lots of different characters, and the way that what you've just described rolls off your tongue, you can tell it's a very fluent aspect of the way that you navigate every day. But experiences make people who they are, right? And I know there's one particular anecdote in your life that helped you develop a lens to look at every day through in terms of your philosophy and how you live. And, share with everybody listening and watching what that was, Jonathan, because when I heard about this, I nearly fell off my chair.
Yeah, so for those who are listening, I literally just told Chris this prior to coming onto this podcast, and I think it's sort of this mentality sort of helps permeate everything that I do. So I was actually on the train when in the early 2000s. In London, with the London bombings, and I was on the train that blew up at King's Cross station, going between the Piccadilly line, going between King's Cross and Russell Square. So I was actually on the train and took a split-second decision not to sort of get onto the carriage where the bomb actually went off, and just ran down the platform and got on. I think like I don't know, maybe the 5th or 6th carriage, and I think having that experience and going through that, which was obviously a pretty crazy day in my sort of own life, I think it just helps keep things in perspective, because you actually never know like what is round the next corner. And like, work is really important. It's really important to make a good job. But I'll just sort of say to everyone like who's listening to this, like, just, I think that having that perspective is really, really important. And that particular incident helped me helps me give that perspective. And I also think having that perspective actually makes me better at my job as well. Like, just actually being able to take some time out and just think, not get too lost in the day-to-day stresses of it, and actually just be able to lift yourself up to say, actually, like, why am I worrying about this? Is this actually, how can I resolve this particular issue, but also keeping it in the perspective of the other things that are going on in one's life. And I've actually there's some sort of tools as well that I've actually personally found really helpful in that as well, sort of keeping that perspective. There's a tool called the Talk It Out app. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Never heard of it.
It's set up by these guys who came and ran a session with us at BritBox called Upping Your Elvis, and it's basically an app where you can just you talk and they record, and it records what you say, and it's just amazing, that sort of feeling of movement, and then the kind of insights that come to you helps give you that perspective. So I think for me personally, having like that, obviously that experience on the train really makes me sort of, maybe who I am today, and then using sort of tools like the one I just mentioned helps me become like a more reflective leader as well, and that's been like my sort of personal journey as well.
What do you think other people's perception of your leadership style and branding is, Jonathan? I mean, I kind of know the answer to this because I've spoken to a lot of people that work for you, but is it important to you what other people think of your leadership style, and what do you think others perceive it to be?
I mean, I think it is important how people perceive your leadership style, because if you are leading a team, your team want to be there. If your team don't want to be there, they'll walk. Yeah. And if they're great people, that's obviously not what you want. So, and then how would others describe my leadership style? People always say to me, it's like energy, positivity, like smile on my face. I must admit, I don't walk into the office trying to think like I'm being really energetic, positive, smile on my face. Maybe it's just like a thing for me, but I think people like appreciate that in like challenging situations, like glass half full, and and also just like committed to running through walls for people. I mentioned the Petra Kucha earlier on in the podcast, and one of the pictures in the Petra Kucha that we put in, and all of my teams sort of really felt we really believed in this, was a bottle being smashed through. So like for myself and the team, like smashing through bottlenecks, like just getting stuff done, because you can be paralyzed by discussion as well, and I think sometimes you just want to like just get moving. And I think that energy, I think, and the energy coupled with like strong organizational skills, I think is I'd like to think is quite powerful. But I'm on a journey as well, and like still learning, and I'll be regularly asking people also for what was great about this, what could be even better as well. The WWW what went well, even better if.
Yeah. Well, I know of interactions with you that you are an individual that's extremely receptive to other people's opinions. Even when I've worked for you in the supplier side, the nature of how we interact with each other is that you do encourage people to say, well, what do you think? This is what I think, but how can you complement that with a wider horizon of things that I maybe haven't seen that should see?
Yeah, exactly. And, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I don't know all the answers. Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. And I will regularly say that to my teams. And I want them to come up with the points of view. They always say for recruitment, recruit people that are smarter than you. And with a variety of different experiences. And that's something I really do believe that is important to do.
Jonathan, the OTT space, since you stepped into it in 2013 and the Wild West days that you described earlier, has changed dramatically. It's super competitive now. It's really technologically advanced. If you look at other sectors such as music and gaming, they are converging at a rate of knots into a similar, if not identical space. What's your personal take on that? And how does it affect your benchmark that you set in terms of exactly what you just said, being even better, going even further, making sure that BritBox International is on the front foot when it comes to the competitive space that you occupy? What's your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's like pretty crazy. Like people have got logins for Netflix, they've got logins for their Disney Plus, for this, for that. I mean, and then you've got your Spotify's, your Apple Music. I mean, it just makes complete sense for there to, within the wider industry, for there to be increased consolidation. Because if you look at it from a customer perspective, a customer is a faff. I don't like, do I remember like this login? Oh, what I've got to reset it. Oh, I just can't be bothered with that. You want to make it as easy as possible for the customers. And that, something at BritBox and Sky, we were really passionate about sort of making sure that product experience is as seamless as possible and reducing the barriers to someone watching that next title. And I think it just makes logical sense to have increased convergence across those industries that you mentioned. And I feel really excited about where the industry is going and where it could go, and just really want to continue to be a part of that journey.
Yeah, it does. It still excites you, doesn't it, Jonathan? You can still, I know from interactions with you and from the spirit of what you've just said, that you're still ignited by what you do, by the sector that you work in.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, it's fun. It's TV. As I said, when I was at KPMG, like I spent a lot of time working for a big global pharmaceutical company. That's not my bag. Yeah, it's great. And it might be other people's bags, and that's completely fine, just to be clear. Yeah. But I'm working in TV. It's like cutting edge technology. It's the kind of thing, you can speak to your mates about when you're like going for some drinks. Albeit I probably don't do as much of that these days with my sort of fairly young children. But it's just fun. Like, I don't know, life's going to be fun as well, and it just sort of brings an added sort of dimension. So I think it's an exciting place to be, and happy to be in it.
Jonathan, I want to wrap up by asking the infamous last question that I always extend to people at the end of their episode of the OTTRED Spotlight. If you could give some advice to the younger Jonathan, what would it be?
Some advice to the younger Jonathan. I think remembering it's like your career is a marathon, not a sprint. In those early days of my career, sort of the desire to sprint, I think, was great. But I think also just being conscious of, by sprinting, what you might miss out along the journey as well. So I would say that. And also, I mentioned earlier in the podcast, like being able to manage yourself as an individual. Like, it's not about, like, in my early days of my career, I'd sort of wake up at like 7 a.m. and I would work like till really late at night just to get something done, which obviously, there are times you got to do that. And I still do that today when I need to, but actually I'll be a much more effective person. I'll be a better leader. I'll be a better dad. I'll be a better husband, a better son if I'm sort of like taking my dog out, going for a run with my dog first thing, or going for a swim. And I'll actually get stuff done significantly faster if I do that. So it's not just about work. It's about actually sort of having those techniques to sort of make yourself as effective as you can be in one's life.
Jonathan, there's so much more I could ask you. I always find our interactions fascinating, and maybe if you'd like to, we can get you back in a year and see how things have progressed with BritBox and yourself. But I want to say, Jonathan, I appreciate your time personally and professionally for doing this episode of the Spotlight podcast. I think people will get so much from it, listening to someone that's worked their way up the ladder and being at your level in such a well-known brand now. And I've certainly taken a lot from it in just listening to you. So Jonathan Gross, thank you so much for being a guest on the OTTRED Spotlight podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris. All the best.